Once again, good afternoon. Psalm 61. Psalm 61. Looking at when your heart is overwhelmed. I've had that a few times in my life. It's generally revolved around when someone has passed away. That's typically when my heart's felt overwhelmed. Growing up, I had several friends who died from car accidents or suicide or one thing or another. And then there was a period of a few years during the course of our marriage that we lost several family members. We each lost a father and a few uncles, grandmothers, and that's not including friends. And so it's just, there's been times just when my heart's been overwhelmed and I haven't known what to do and that stress. And I'm sure that you've experienced that to some degree as well. And so that's what we're looking at, is really not just about the heart being overwhelmed, but what we do during those times. Over in Psalm 61 is a Psalm of David. And we're just using this as kind of our launching pad. We're going to get to some other places, but just look at the first 4 verses of Psalm 61. Hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the ends of the earth I call to you. I call as my heart grows faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been my refuge, a strong tower against the foe. I long to dwell in your tent forever and take refuge in the shelter of your wings. This same sentiment is actually found over in Psalm 50 and verse 15. Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you will honor me. See, God sees all things. God knows all things. He is the beginning and the end. In Psalm 139 and verse 7, the psalmist cries out, "Where can I go? If I go to the heavens, you're there. If I go to the mountaintops, you're there. If I go down to the grave, you're there. There is nowhere that I can escape your purview." But with that also comes the understanding that there is no suffering that is outside of God's view. The suffering that you have when your heart is feeling overwhelmed, that's not out of God's view either. The pain that you go through, the problems that people may cause. And in fact, let's take a look at Hannah for a few moments. Hannah, this is over in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. It's not a book that we visit that often. So if you want to use the table of contents at the front, that's perfectly fine. Or do whatever little tapping you've got to do on your app there. So this is Hannah. And I want us to look at the first 18 verses. I know last week and this week we're reading a little bit of a semi-long section. But really there's a few things to see here. So this is 1 Samuel, verses 1 through 18. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite, from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Now, pay attention here especially. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah To sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife, Peninnah, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Now, if you don't know what that means, it means that she couldn't bear children. It closed her womb. Now, and because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Once they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, that is, she is in anguish, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and said to her, How long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Not so, my Lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. Notice how she equates wickedness with alcohol, but that's another lesson for another day. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant what you have asked of him. She said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Now you might say, well, Mike, we're talking about our heart feeling overwhelmed. What is it that we see from Hannah and just these 18 verses? So we have a woman. She is married to a man who he's got another wife. And she doesn't have any children. But look there again at verses 6 and 7. Because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her. She wept and would not eat. Have you ever had that in your Christian life where you're going through something and you go to church? The place where you should feel most safe, most unjudged, most welcome, only to have someone in that congregation taunting you every time you show up. See, this wasn't we're going to services every week like we do now. And her rival was the other wife. Now, what this also tells us, because it only mentions going to the temple, is that it wasn't happening at home. Probably because the husband wouldn't have stood for it. Because he loved her. That's why he gave her a double portion. But that also tells us something else. That when her rival, the other wife, had an opportunity, she took it. When they were away from the husband, when they were at the place when Hannah should have felt the most secure, a woman that she lived with day after day after day would taunt her. And it says to irritate her. And it even tells us it got her so upset that she would just do nothing but cry, and she couldn't even eat. Has your worship ever been disturbed like that? Where you're like, man, I know I got to go to services, but I know I know when I get up there, so-and-so's going to say something, because they just can't help themselves. It's almost like they want to see me miserable. And here's the thing, too. This wasn't private either. This was public. This was public ridicule. At the house of God, when she should have felt most safe, she's ridiculed by someone who is of the same faith. That's like coming up to services and a fellow Christian is just there, not to worship God, not to comfort, but to just get on your last nerves and to do it all on purpose. And it moves her to such a degree. Her heart is so overwhelmed that she's weeping. And there is this silent, broken prayer. And we find there in verse 14 that Eli misjudged her. Thought she was drunk because she's praying and her lips are moving, but there's no words coming out. Eli, religious man. His sons were priests. And yet he had even judged her wrong. Have you ever had that happen? You're in such pain and all you can do is cry out to God. And yet there are religious people on one hand, Christians on one hand, who are just making it worse. And then on the other hand, you have Christians who are doing nothing but judging you for your response. Imagine that for a moment, just being judged for the way you pray to God. Because someone else couldn't hear your prayer. I don't care if you like to hear a prayer or not. God certainly did. And his is the only one that mattered. And notice there in the last verse that we read, verse 18. She said, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." And then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Her heart was lifted before she received an answer. God answered the need of her heart before he answered her situation. And I would ask you, what is it that you're holding on to? What are you afraid to bring to God because of the way that others may perceive you or act around you? Here we have a very devout woman. A woman who loved God so much that she says, if you give me a child, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give him back to you. And he's going to serve you. Now, considering who her rival was, her rival might have poked a little bit more fun at her. Might have had a little, you mean to tell, see, I've got all these sons and daughters. God gives you a son and you give him up? I can imagine the conversation. I mean, after all, this is a shameless woman who's not afraid to sit there and go poking at someone in the middle of a worship service. God answered her heart. He spoke to her heart before he spoke to the situation. But you notice, though, that after her prayer, she got up and ate. She didn't sit there and keep wallowing in it. She wasn't fasting. She got up and ate. See, here's one of the keys to faith and to your own prayer life. Okay? You might pray and ask God for something, whether it's to get over a sickness, whether it's to pay a bill, whatever. But when your prayer is over, do you already have the mentality that God has answered it? See, that's part of the problem. A lot of people, they'll pray, and they'll pray consistently. God do this, God do this, God do this. And then they'll get up, and they won't think about it anymore until the next time they go back, and they'll say, God do this, God do... Same thing, over and over and over. The difference between that and Hannah prayed, and she said, God heard my prayer. God's going to answer my prayer. I'm going to go eat. When you're done praying, do you have the attitude attitude and the mentality that God has already answered the prayer. Because that's what you need to have. What is it that you're holding on to that you are still unwilling to give to God because you don't think that He's going to answer? You know, we see back there in that psalm, in Psalm 64, that verses 1 and the kind of the latter portion there of verse 2. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. He wants to be led, not self-raised. So many people, they want to do everything themselves. When their heart is overwhelmed, they want to sit there and they want to pray things like, God, tell me how to handle insert whatever it is. Instead of, God, you lead me there, but you handle it. You let me see your glory. That's not testing God. That's wanting to be a witness to what God is doing in your life. You take me to higher ground. I can't do this on my own. Proverbs 3, 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Don't do that. We have Scripture telling us that man, he thinks his way is right, but the end is death. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 4, Paul, when he's writing to those in Corinth, he's writing about those in the Old Testament, and he said that they drank from the same spiritual drink that we drink from, and then he says, which is Christ. Christ is there then, He's here now. Everyone who hears what Christ says through His Word and does what He says, according to Matthew 7:24, he's like the wise man who built his house on the rock. That's where we want to be. You think of Moses over there in Exodus chapter 17. Exodus chapter 17, there's no water. Right? The people, they're sitting there complaining left and right. They want to be back in Egypt. There's pressure on him. But he doesn't have a solution for them. He's in the same situation that they are. They're all out there together. And, he doesn't have a Yeti cup sitting there in the back of his cart or something with some ice water in it. And everybody else is just dehydrating. No, he's in the exact same situation. You look there, Exodus 17 and verse 1, the whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So he's got all of this pressure, and the people turn on him there in verses 2 and 3. So they quarreled, they argued with Moses and said, give us water to drink. Moses replied, why are you arguing with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people, they were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against him. And they said, why do you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst? So he's got all of this, he's got this pressure, but there's no solution to it. And the people, they're afraid. And because they're afraid, it starts to become an accusation against him. And he receives these personal attacks, and the burden is just so heavy that he cries out. He cries out there in verse 4, cries to the Lord, what am I to do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. Again, we have religious people, God's chosen people, focusing more on the things of the world to such a degree that it starts off a little bit, maybe a little bit easy. And then it grows. Give us some water. I don't have any. I'm just like you are. And then it becomes an accusation. And then it escalates from an accusation to where they're about ready to bury him up to his neck in sand and start throwing rocks until he's dead. Now look at verses 5 and 6. The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders and of Israel. God directs him to the rock, not to effort. He doesn't say, "Well, Moses, what you need to do is y'all need to stop here for a little bit. And you need to start digging a well. And once you get, 100, 150 feet down, maybe a little bit less, then water's going to come. And you need to do this and you need to do that." No, God, he directs him to the rock. No effort. All Moses had to do was obey. That's it. Now just imagine the scene for a moment that here you are, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people that have come out. Everybody's thirsty. Everybody's arguing with you. And I don't care how brave you are, I'm going to get nervous. You know? I mean, how many of you would get nervous if even 5 people just started crying? I would. You get 5 people crowding around me and they're yelling at me and they're starting to pick up rocks. Yeah, I'm shaking a little bit. You know? And then he just walks off. He just walks off with some of the elders. God didn't say put in your own effort. He said, "I want you to do what I told you to do." I know they're over here arguing. I know they want to stone you. You do what I tell you to do in the face of that fear, in the face of that adversity. And then he strikes, and you get water from the rock, and that is that God gives provision from the impossible. So often we go through our lives and we look at circumstance after circumstance after circumstance and we say, "God can't do that." No, he can't do this either. He can't. Why? Because you can't? Because I can't? Don't you remember that Jesus said with man it is impossible, but with God all things are possible? See, the answer wasn't in Moses. The answer was in the rock that God led him to. We often try to carry so many things in our life that we can be overwhelmed. We try to handle it all. Try to keep it to ourselves. And you know what? When we get those people in our lives that they just criticize us, even when it judge us, even when it's at church, that makes it even more difficult. And we want to shut down a little bit. When we've got those people that come into our lives and start accusing us of things. You're not really a Christian, you're a hypocrite. Why are you a hypocrite? Because you say this, but then you did that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm a hypocrite. I didn't say I was perfect. Not once. There are times I am an absolute 100% grade A certified hypocrite. And I'm not saying that because I'm proud of it, because I'm certainly not. I'm saying it because Christians need to stop lying to everybody else and lying to themselves about how perfect they are. Because they're not. We are not. Be honest. God already knows. But you know what? Forgiveness is still there. It doesn't mean He doesn't forgive you. It doesn't mean that He doesn't love you. We try to carry all of these things, but here's the deal. Is that we want to hold on. We want to say that God can't fix it, and yet, and we let all of these outside influence just keep our hearts overwhelmed, whether it's other people, whether it's fear, whether it's accusations, no matter what the case may be. And yet, He says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." In the face of fear, you do what I told you to do. Moses, I'm sure, was afraid. Let's face it, Aaron's not going to be much of a help. He's over there making golden calves because he's afraid. I don't know what happened, God. We put some jewelry in. Next thing you know, out pops this calf. Aaron, he's no help. What's Moses to do? Facing hundreds of thousands of people. Sure, not everybody wanted to stone him, but those who were close enough to wanted to, and that would have been enough. But God says, in the face of fear, you go to where I direct you. You go to the rock. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, when you are in the face of fear, you go to the rock. You go to Christ. That's where you go. Because you can rest secure. One last point that I'll make. There in verses 3 and 4 of Psalm 61. You have been my refuge. Have been. Past tense. You have been. You have always been my refuge. A strong tower against the foe. I long to dwell in your tent forever and take refuge in the shelter of your wings. I will put my trust in you. Jesus said it this way in John chapter 14, verse 27. My peace I give to you. My peace I leave with you. The world, he was leaving them. They had given up absolutely everything to follow him. Everything. And for a while, things are going okay. At the beginning of the ministry, you just got a rabbi. He's kind of going around. No one really knows who he is. Can anything good come out of Nazareth and all of that? But then it starts to pick up steam. He says, you're going to be hated for me, for my name's sake. There, a portion of Scripture where he tells the apostles, there will come a time when they will take off your head and think that they are doing God a service. Does that sound like anything happening in the world today? Maybe not here in the United States, but it is certainly happening. And if you can't see that, you need to get your head out of the sand. So you go to the rock. Isaiah 41 and verse 10. Do not fear. I am your God. Ruth, she was a widow. She was an outsider. Vulnerable. There was no covering. There was no security or anything like that. She leaves everything behind and chooses God over comfort. Everything. She gleans in the fields. Low place, full of dependence, always depending on someone else, not herself. Husband gone, family pretty much gone. Boaz notices her. And in chapter 2 and verse 8, we see that he gives her grace before there was any type of effort. And then she's covered and secured. I encourage you to just read Ruth. Just the first 2 chapters, if you don't want to do the whole book. And you'll see someone who goes from being a widow, an outsider, and vulnerable to someone who is covered and secure. She came empty and exposed, but she left covered and secure. There are so many people, they want to come to God, but they're all filled with something else. You have to find the end of yourself. You have to empty yourself. You have to allow yourself to be emptied before you can be filled. That's exactly what she did. Let me ask, are you striving or are you resting? You as a Christian, as a born-again believer, are you constantly fighting and at war with everything and everybody? Or are you just resting in Christ? Are you just being obedient to God regardless of the fear? Regardless of the criticism? Regardless of the judgment? Are you just doing what God says and then resting in Him? When is it in your life that you are finally going to lay your burdens down, how long are you going to carry them with you? Because I'll tell you something, I've known people who have been Christians for 30 or 40 years, and yet there are things that they did as a teenager that they just still can't let go of. It's not doing you any good to hold on to a past that God has already forgiven. And I know that sometimes we sit here and we say, well, I need to forgive myself. I've said that too. And I've come to realize that that's just a lot of fluff. Because there's nowhere in the Bible that God says you need to forgive yourself. And the reason that we don't need to be worried about forgiving ourselves is because He's already forgiven us. Move on. Amen. That's it. Move on. When your heart is overwhelmed, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, whether it's someone who's antagonistic, whether it's your own fear, when your heart is overwhelmed, are you just remaining obedient, or are you holding on to the fear? What is it that's in your life that you don't want to put down? Because I'll tell you, some people, they're addicted to their past. And that they just can't let it go. They've just got to dwell on certain memories and certain actions. Scripture tells us, though, we seek a place, we seek an individual that is higher than ourselves. He says, come to me. I will rescue you. I will be your God, and you will honor me. And maybe you're here this morning, and you've had things in your life. Maybe it's been judgment. Maybe it's just been fear preventing you from moving closer to God and living beneath the cross. Maybe that's you and you need the prayers of the congregation. Maybe it's not you, but you have someone in your life who just can't let things go, and you need prayers for them. The Lord's invitation is always open. It's not just when Perry's leading us in a song or Mike's leading us in a song. It's always there. You just have to grab hold of it. When Moses went before the people with some of the elders, do you think that the people suddenly stopped and said, nope, we're going to put our rocks away, don't bother with this guy? It was still there. Moses going to the rock, I can picture it, is very much like Christ going to the cross. Those people in Jerusalem didn't suddenly fade away. They were there taunting the entire way. Just like Moses, I can picture it. Him going to that rock, however far off it was, and the people just constantly, why'd you bring us out here, Moses? Come on, old gray beard, why'd you bring us out here? You just want to kill us all? I can just picture that. But he kept his eyes on the end. Are you keeping your eyes on the end? Is that where your focus is when the world, quite frankly, is going to hell in a handbasket? What is your desire for the end of your life? Is it to hear, well done, good and faithful servant? You rested in me, and I'm your God, and you will honor me, enter into the joys of my Father? Or were you here? You didn't trust me enough. You wanted to do it all on your own. Depart from me. I have no use for people like that. If you need to respond to the gospel in any way, then you have that opportunity as together we stand and as we sing.